Hi, I'm Tony Lyons. Welcome to the MAHA Media Hub and welcome to the MAHA Revolution. We've got an incredible lineup today. I'm grateful for all of them for standing up to the status quo, challenging the status quo. The first is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He's director of the NIH. Then we're going to have Dr. Joe Ladapo, Surgeon General of Florida, Kyle Diamantas, Deputy Commissioner of the FDA, Vani, also known as the Food Babe, Gary Brecka, the Ultimate Human, Zack, the Republican candidate for governor of Iowa, and then finally the great Russell Brand. So each of them have been helping to encourage the incredible reforms, the bold, decisive actions over the past year. And they're really inspiring examples of what we're all trying to do, we're all doing. So we've been lied to, censored, gaslit, subjected to propaganda by some of the most powerful people on the planet. And it's happened pretty much to all of us. We were told that the science was settled. We were told that we were anti-science, that we were conspiracy theorists, that we were the problem. And they've used every trick in the book and invented new ones to keep selling us products that don't work, to poison us, to keep us sick. But we're different. We don't want to substitute one type of settled science for another type. We want to engage in real debate. We want maximum openness to ideas, radical transparency. We want to include all voices to encourage skepticism, curiosity, questioning of authority in every way. That's what's going to make this country healthy. That's what's going to make being healthy more affordable. That's what's going to rebuild trust in our government agencies and help us to end the corruption, the waste, the fraud, the abuse that's got us into this mess in the first place. And that's what's going to take us to an end of the chronic disease epidemic once and for all. So let's get started. First up, we have the director of the NIH, Jay Bhattacharya. He was a professor of medicine, economics, health research policy at Stanford before leading the NIH. He's also the co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, bravely standing up to the unscientific lockdown measures during COVID. Welcome, Dr. Bhattacharya.
Thanks for having me on, Tony. So nice to be on it with you. At the NIH, the mission of the NIH, if you listen to it, it's like something everyone should agree with. It says that if you are that we should be funding research that advances the health and longevity of the American people. But if you look over the last 15 years, that just hasn't translated over. We haven't seen an advance in the health and longevity of the American people. In fact, we're in the middle of a massive chronic disease crisis, and the NIH needs to be playing a fundamental role in transforming the chronic disease crisis. The research that we do needs to actually address the chronic disease crisis. So concretely, in the 8 months I've been here, I've focused on turning the NIH to that task. Like, for instance, we have launched this Autism Data Science Initiative, where the idea is let's allow the researchers of the country to ask the questions that they just really weren't allowed to ask before about why has autism rates gone up to 1 in 31 in the population, right? As a scientist, I would love to know the answer to that question, but I don't have the answer to that question. And in part, the problem is that topics or like that had taboo areas where you couldn't tread as a scientist, or for fear of being canceled. We've changed that. By launching this Autism Data Science Initiative, we send a clear signal to the scientists of the country that no hypothesis is off limits. Let's actually get an answer for the millions of parents who are facing the problem of autism in a way that results in better outcomes for their kids, ways to prevent it, and so on. I think it's one of those things where, like, you don't think about the NIH as something that as an institute that where like it prohibits or inhibits research, but in many ways it was, especially during the pandemic. You saw that the NIH went after scientists who disagreed on do the COVID vaccines prevent transmission? It didn't fund enough research on the side effects of the COVID vaccines or other vaccines. The new NIH will address the chronic disease problems of the country in ways that do not have any of these taboo areas. And to me, that's pretty much the fundamental promise of MAHA is because MAHA needs to be based on excellent science. And if we can get scientists to do what they do best, ask questions in rigorous ways, that's how we're going to succeed in that goal. The chronic disease problems of the country are so great that it's going to require a full engagement by the scientific community, and by moving politics out of the NIH, removing taboo areas, and then focusing the sort of the vast resources of the NIH and of the scientific community on these problems. I have full confidence that we're going to be able to look back, just 4 years from now and say, well, the flatlining in life expectancy was just a thing of the past, that the sharp rise in diabetes, type 2 diabetes, the sharp rise in autism, all of those things were, we finally turned the corner on that because the excellent science will be able to address each and every one of those topics.
Thanks so much, Jay. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we really want to encourage disagreement. I mean, we want people to question everything. And that's how we're going to get the best outcomes. That's how we're going to get real science. So, we don't know what the truth is. This is a process. It's a movement to try to get closer to the truth. And that's always going to change. So next up, we have Dr. Joe Ladapo. He's been a real fighter, and he's been somebody I've been so impressed in his willingness to kind of look at things and to research things and to change his mind. And that's what we should all do. That's what we should all be open to. So he was a vocal, fighter against the oppressive COVID vaccine measures and all of the other measures that were taken then. And he's just taken some really bold actions in the last year that I think we should all be grateful for, and that he's just a great example of what's possible in this country. So thanks so much, Joe, and great to have you on.
Oh, thanks, Tony. Yeah, and great to be on this call with all these folks who are in this effort we have here as a nation to, please, pursue health and stop the poisoning. And it sounds crazy that we're in a state where progress in terms of technological progress has come along with poisoning, but literally that's the state we're in with our air, with our food, with our water. And I'm greatly appreciative to all of the people who are working in these different areas. So I'll share briefly the Florida perspective, and I'll also say I just had a terrific time at the MAHA Summit with all of you a few weeks ago. That was just fantastic. So the Florida perspective. So we try to keep things busy and interesting because there's so much work to be done, as all of you know. The first thing I'll share briefly is that we're going to be leaning into this area of psychiatric medication prescriptions for children. So that's an area we're going to be leaning into. It's an area that is, really an enormous concern. Just kids are absolutely being prescribed too much of these medications too often. And, the data are showing that it seems to put them on a treadmill, if you will, of just more medications, that just getting prescribed these medications, whether it's for ADHD or other things, is a prescription for getting more in the future. So it's a major problem. It has not received enough attention, and the fact that, as I've learned from many of you, that there absolutely are alternatives, whether it's changes in diet or environmental changes that absolutely help kids with these behavioral issues. Those opportunities are there, and this reflexive reach for powerful medications in very young, still evolving minds is just, it's a catastrophe. So that's an area we're going to be leaning more into in Florida. The second thing I want to mention as we're coming up into our legislative session here is the Patient Bill of Rights. So we are aiming to put an end to the discrimination of patients and families who make different vaccine choices. This extends from every family who, for example, maybe doesn't want a single vaccine, to families who want all the vaccines but just want to take them on their own timetable and not necessarily with the CDC timetable in sync with that. So here in Florida, I'm sad to say it, but we have a lot of discrimination from pediatric offices. And, you'd think that wouldn't be the case in Florida, but it totally is. And, it's partly because the AAP, the Pediatrics Society, has really leaned into this. It's actually just in the last few years, they have basically encouraged pediatricians to exclude kids whose parents want to do an alternative vaccine schedule, who deviate at all from the CDC schedule. So we're hoping to put a total end to that. And I know parents are going to be better off for it. And the pediatricians are going to be better off for it too, because they have been engaged, sleepwalked into very unethical behavior. And then the third piece that I want to highlight that we're working toward in this legislative session is an end to all vaccine mandates in Florida law. And that's something that we announced a few months ago with Governor Ron DeSantis, and we're working to make it happen. I think everybody on this call knows how uncomfortable that makes a lot of lawmakers here in any state, but here in Florida too. But it's the right thing to do. And this idea that forcing people to put things in their God-given body is something that we should do is absolutely wrong. I get that people have concerns, but the ends don't justify the means. We need to achieve good good ends through means that are ethical. So that's something we need. We need everyone's help on, just to keep letting our lawmakers here in Florida know how important it is for people to be able to make decisions without coercion about what they put into their bodies. So I'm hoping that the Florida lawmakers keep hearing from all of you Floridians who are on the call about how important that is. All right, thanks.
Joe, clearly, I'm really grateful, and I'm sure all of us are, for the things that you're doing in Florida. But what we really want is for people to start doing these things all around the country. Nobody should be forced to do a medical intervention of any kind. And that's a fundamental principle, and it's so important, and we've lost track of it. So thanks so much for everything that you've done.
Thanks, Tony.
Next up, we have Kyle Diamantas. Kyle leads the FDA's Human Foods Program, looking at nutrition, food safety. He's the FDA's top food person, setting all of their strategic directions for food policy. So thanks so much, Kyle. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, great to be here, Tony. Really appreciate the invite. And look, I thought I would spend a couple minutes talking about where we are at FDA, where we're headed, and what we're trying to address. And look, it's no surprise that we have a chronic disease epidemic in this country. I like to call it a national nutrition crisis. We are, number one in health spend, but 46th in life expectancy. 6 in 10 of us are living with chronic illness. 1 in 3 Americans dying every year from heart disease or stroke, and 15,000 new cases of diabetes each week. So look, we've hurt ourselves. We're now the sickest generation. We're dying younger than our parents' generation. And what we're trying to do at FDA from a food perspective is really address these issues head on. There's nutrition issues, there's food chemical issues, there's microbiological food safety issues. We're trying to tackle all 3 of those and do it in a really meaningful way. I can say that the first 2 years of the Trump administration will deliver the most significant food reforms in modern history. You've already seen some of the work we've done on petroleum-based food dyes. We have dietary guidelines for Americans coming out that is a joint project between HHS and USDA. We're working on front-of-pack labeling. We're working to define ultra-processed foods. We've actually stood up for the first time in FDA history a post-market review office so we can look at chemicals in the post-market context and take action and remove those chemicals from the food supply where appropriate. We're working on a big project for infant formula with Project Stork Speed or Operation Stork Speed. And we've stood up a nutrition regulatory science program with Jay at NIH that we hope will be very successful and really help us understand some of those root causes of things like the impact of ultra-processed foods on the gut microbiome and how some of these ultra-processed foods, food additives may impact our chronic disease crisis in this country. One of the things we're really proud of that just landed this week is our GRAS reform rule finally finding its way to OMB. So GRAS reform, we've talked a lot about that in the past. That's the loophole that was created in the 1950s as part of the food additive amendments that has allowed a proliferation of food additives into the food supply without review or notification to FDA. That's where we've gotten into this place where you hear people talk about, whether it's 1,000 or 10,000 chemicals being used in the U.S. food supply. We don't have a good track of that because the GRAS loophole does not require companies to notify FDA of when they introduce a new or novel chemical into the U.S. food supply. So really proud of our GRAS reform rule. That was a big priority for Secretary Kennedy. It's one of the first things he announced when he got into office. We finally got that rule all the way through FDA, through HHS, and now at the White House for review and approval. And we're really excited for that rule to hit and open up to public comment here as soon as it gets through OMB. But, look, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to be done. And, we are applying a whole of government approach to tackling our nutrition crisis and our chronic disease epidemic. But, it's not an overnight fix, and it's not something that we can regulate ourselves out of, right? This is not a problem that FDA alone can solve. I was talking with Gary Brecka the other day about how, we regulate 80% of the food supply out of FDA, 230,000 facilities, 30,000 farms, 500 plus recalls a year. And we do all of that on a budget that's about half the size of the Dallas School District. That's our annual budget appropriated from Congress. So, we're doing this work on what I would consider a small budget for the remit we have, given our chronic disease crisis and the size of the economy that we regulate from a food perspective. So, we're not going to regulate our way out of this. For MAHA to be a successful societal movement, it requires more than just government legislation or regulation. It requires private investment. It requires consumer buy-in. Really requires that continued consumer education and engagement in the political and policy process. And I think, a lot of credit goes to Secretary Kennedy for coalescing sort of these previously disparate entities and factions under one roof to really address these issues head on. So I just want to tell people, it's not just us at FDA. It's not USDA. It's not the government alone that can solve these problems. It continues to take really a societal movement from all of us to address these issues, for you to continue to be involved, continue to be educated, continue to buy the right foods, continue to take care of your children. These are all things. It's not going to be an overnight fix. We're certainly doing our part. We're going to be transformational on the FDA perspective from the food side. But, the MAHA movement itself is larger than just government regulation and government legislation. And, I think that with that movement, with what's been coalesced under this tent of MAHA, we will continue to see changes. We'll continue to be successful in the Trump administration, and really excited about the work we will continue to do at FDA over the next 4 years. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks so much, Kyle. And thanks for all the work that you've done on food dyes, on the dietary guidelines, on stork speed, on, processed foods and the connection with the gut biome problems that so many people have. Clearly, that is a big part of the national chronic disease problem. And it's just so amazing to have a government and to have people like you who are part of getting that fixed. And it's also really great to hear that there's more progress being made on the crazy GRAS loophole. It's just something that is it's just unimaginable that we could have a system like that. And it's just so important, so critical to our future to be fixing that problem. And then the last thing is that, you had pointed out how important it is to get consumer buy-in. And I think that really goes to cultural change. And we're seeing that. We're seeing millions of people change what they do on a daily basis. And, that to a great extent is on the shoulders of people like you and of Secretary Kennedy and of all the people who are on this call that, if we can change the way people think and the way people act, that might be even more important than changing laws. So thanks so much. Next up, we have Vani Hari. Vani is known as the Food Babe. She's a corporate accountability activist for more than 10 years, really fighting to get toxins out of our food. She's also the best-selling author of multiple books, just really terrific books. She's the founder of Vani, an all-natural organic line of food and supplements. So thanks so much, Vani. Great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. And Kyle, that was the perfect segue to what's happening across the nation right now. There is an incredible movement happening at local governments. And just yesterday, historic, first of its kind lawsuit was filed by the city of San Francisco, suing 10 of the top big food companies like General Mills and PepsiCo and Coca-Cola and Nestle and Kellanova and Kellogg's and Mondelez and Mars and Conagra and Kraft, holding them accountable for the fact that they have developed ultra-processed foods that are designed to be addictive, that's similar to nicotine because they're using the same science in the playbook as tobacco companies, having items that are targeted towards children and the marketing of it borrowed straight from the tobacco playbook, having the daily consumption of these junk processed foods normalized through aggressive marketing. And this is something that has been tied. The ultra-processed food studies that you've seen come out in the last several months, tying that it is related to every single disease we face as a human population, the rising rates of obesity and diabetes and heart disease and cancer. And now San Francisco is looking to hold these food companies accountable for all of the damages that they've had to adhere to as a local government, trying to stop these chronic disease rates and the rise in healthcare costs. I just want to level set some of the examples of how ultra-processed foods are designed to be addicting. And this is really exciting that the dietary guidelines are going to be coming out very soon. They're going to be talking about ultra-processed foods. It's also very exciting that we're looking at, the FDA is looking at defining these ultra-processed foods and studying it more so that we can move the marketplace towards more real food. Because again, as Kyle mentioned, it's going to take more than just the government to change how we are eating and change the lifestyle factors that are leading to this rise in chronic disease. And I just want to give you some of these examples. I thought they were fun to bring today. Cheetos are engineered to melt away so that your brain thinks that you didn't eat anything. It literally is called vanishing caloric density when they look at engineering their food to dissolve quickly so the brain doesn't register the calories so that you keep reaching for more. Many of these foods are laced with MSG like Doritos and Chick-fil-A. And it's a perfectly designed blend of fat and salt and acid to keep you hooked. It's one of the reasons they give MSG to rats in obesity studies to make them fat and they keep overeating. It's the same way the food companies want us to keep overeating. The Bliss Point, the formula that maximizes cravings, is trying to achieve in each one of these situations. It's one of the reasons why PepsiCo has a robot that mimics human taste buds. I don't know how the human race can stand a chance when we are up against that kind of engineered food, how we can even barely take place in the marketplace. So it's really exciting that these lawsuits are happening because it's going to delve out this information to the public so they can make better choices. They can say, you know what, I don't want to be part of this anymore. And I think one of the main key components of the Make America Healthy Again movement is getting Americans to think differently about how they're eating, what products they're choosing, so that we can create a new marketplace of having more real food available in schools and when we travel and when we're outside of our houses and when we're on the go and we're at work and we're working, having options that aren't just Doritos and Cheetos in the vending machine. some other things that make ultra processed foods really addictive are cereals are marketed to children because they actually stay crunchy in milk longer. And so it increases the satisfaction hit. Candies and chips are shaped to make a noise. A loud crunch boosts the perceived freshness and reward factor in the brain, and the food scientists know this. Obviously, the bright artificial colors make it look more flavorful than it is. If they didn't use those dyes, then you wouldn't eat it because it would be like, gray or brown. It wouldn't be as appealing. And so it doesn't stimulate those factors in your brain. And then the other thing is like you think of yogurts and other healthier snacks that they're trying to make of like low fat ice creams and other things. Well, they're increasing the amount of emulsifiers, thickeners, sweeteners that hit the dopamine pathways similar to nicotine. And according to the study cited in the complaint, is one of the issues of what's making us so sick. So this is really exciting. I saw some comments from, I'm over now, but I saw some comments from the mayor or the person who created this lawsuit. And, they always like to take a dig at Secretary Kennedy, but I can tell you right now, these type of lawsuits and this type of movement would have never happened had it not been for Secretary Kennedy and President Trump making this a national issue. We are in a new era, and I'm so excited to be part of it. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And those are such great points, that we're being lied to. We've been lied to for a long, long time. And people like Donald Trump, like Secretary Kennedy, and like you, frankly, represent honesty and real science and, taking back our bodies and our health. That we've got a mainstream media that is, feeding us corporate talking points, is telling us that fast food isn't quite as bad as we thought it was, that it's actually maybe okay to eat fast food. And then we've got, the New York Times telling us toxic pesticides aren't so terrible, really. Big food companies tricking our bodies, mixing up our minds, making us feel hungry when we're really full. And then we've got big pharma companies, coming out with drugs to make us feel full when we're really hungry. So, we're being lied to and played with in so many different ways. So it's great to have people like you who are telling us the truth, fighting to get people to a position where they can really make good decisions for themselves. So thanks so much, Vani, for everything.
Thank you, Gary.
Next up, we have Gary Brecka. He's known as the ultimate human, and he's earned this through his dedication to sharing real science and helping people to optimize their well-being, their full potential, their longevity. He's a real champion of MAHA principles, fighting for accountability from big pharma, big food, big ag, traveling around the world, giving these messages to millions and millions of people who desperately need them. So thanks so much, Gary, for all that you're doing.
Of course, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's just such a pleasure to be here. I had the pleasure of having Kyle Diamantas and Marty McCary in my unit here in Miami for a whole day. Yesterday, we ran two incredible podcasts. I'm actually most proud of the fact that they came in their bureaucratic Washington suits, and I threw them both board shorts and stuck them down in a 50-degree cold plunge. So Marty and Kyle did their first cold plunges yesterday. I think I've turned them into converts. But there's a parallel narrative and movement that's developing, alongside a MAHA that, we haven't talked a lot about, and maybe we haven't just drawn a lot of attention to. And it's, it's rogue, in my opinion, the Environmental Protection Agency and some of the rather aggressive and rapid mechanisms they've used to approve these PFAS, these forever chemicals that are being applied to our food supply. I mean, there's a lot of talk about what's in our food, how is our food made, how is it packaged, how is it stored, how is it preserved. Vani, just a masterful job of talking about how there's an intentional scientific drive to actually make food more palpable, make it more addictive, dinging this RF1A2 receptor, creating dopamine rewards, which are essentially drug rewards for eating foods. But even if we clean up what is in our food. We have to talk about what's being applied to our food. This is the issue with seed oils, right? Everyone thinks we're attacking the plant. We're not attacking the plant. We're attacking the distance from the plant to the table. It's the application of hexanes to degum these oils. It's the heating to 405 degrees and turning them rancid, turning them putrefied, and then deodorizing them with things like sodium hydroxide, known carcinogens, known neurotoxins. These are classified neurotoxins and carcinogens. And so now you've taken something that was non-toxic, harmless to begin with, and you've made it toxic. And, I don't know that at any other time in our history, we've seen the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, move with such haste to protect pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, and widen the lanes for them to be applied in mass to our foods. During the government shutdown, just on the 5th of November, they approved one of the most highly persistent pesticides, which is called cyclobutyfluoram, which is usually applied to golf courses and lawns, but now is being applied in mass to cotton, to soybeans, to lettuce, to other genetically modified foods in toxic amounts, far beyond their own standard for safety. And these are in the group of PFAs, perfluoroalkyls, polyfluoroalkyls. These are forever chemicals. These are chemicals our bodies do not have enzymes to digest. They are non-metabolites, which means the body doesn't have the mechanism to eliminate the waste. And by waste, I don't mean stool and urine. I mean cellular waste, the actual inflammatory cascade that results from putting these into our bodies. And while we might not have causal direct risk, we do have correlated risks for these. And my concern is that we accomplish all of these things in the MAHA agenda. We seem to have tremendous buy-off, at the height of the Food and Drug Administration, the National Institute of Health, the food safety programs, and I commend all of those actions. But to the extent that we cannot address some of the actions that are being done by the Environmental Protection Agency, in my opinion, going completely rogue and accelerating the approval of a lot of these chemicals, we will lose this fight because we will not have removed the forever chemicals that are really poisoning our children and should be a part of this review on root causes of autism and neurodevelopmental diseases. This cyclobutyfluoram actually breaks down into a smaller forever chemical, more dangerous chemical, called trifluoroacetic acid. And this TFA is the most pervasive PFAS in the world. It is the most prevalent in our water supply. There is a lot of research that is leading us to believe that the world is about to exceed what's known as the planetary boundary threat. And this is where social health harms become irreversible, where the toxicity levels reach a point where they're no longer reversible, and this becomes a generational poisoning. So, I don't mean to sound so alarmist, but I would love to see if we could broaden our reach to our friends at the Environmental Protection Agency and maybe listen to some of their concerns for crop yields and profitability for our farmers, because we know the sustainable farming, organic farming, pesticide-free, herbicide-free, insecticide-free farming can be profitable and have similar yields to these crops that are applying all these dangerous chemicals. And I just feel it'd be an awful shame for us to have three more years of successful legislative initiatives and all this traction in the MAHA movement, only to not have stopped or addressed these PFAS that are being applied as pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides that are now it's because these lanes are being widened. They're going from golf course and lawn treatments to treatments that are being applied to our most genetically modified crops, which are always also the most highly consumed crops. These are grains, wheats, flours, rye, barley, hops, that isn't just about everything, beer to all of our grains, all of our cereals. I wanted to raise that, because I know that Kyle offered to bring some of these folks into, the MAHA movement and onto the MAHA call, but to the extent that you have relationships with them, let's make a concerted effort as MAHA Action to reach out to these folks, hear them out, and talk about solutions that might be anything other than widening the lanes for these forever chemicals that are really wrecking our cellular biology. And I am ending right on time, so I should get a cookie or something.
You definitely should. Gary, thanks so much. I mean, that's a great point, that there's been a ton of progress, but this is a never-ending battle. And there's so much more to do. And there is so much corruption. It is really a never-ending battle against corruption. And it's just relentless onslaughts. And we want to be on the side of healing. We want to be healers. And like President Trump says, we need to fight, fight, fight. And we need to keep making progress. And we need to hold the people accountable who are, leading us to these setbacks. And there have been some setbacks. So, we're going to keep on pushing. We want to make this country healthy. We want to make everybody in this country healthier. And it's not going to be easy. Make no mistake. This is a real battle, and it's endless. And we can do better and better and better. And that's what we really have to do. So next up, we have Zack Lahn. So let me just say a couple things. At MAHA Action, our mission is clear. We want to make America healthy. And, to do that, we have to sustain this commitment for the long haul. And to do that, we really have to have dedicated leaders. And, that's going to be at every level of government, from Washington to state capitals across the country. And that's why we're really excited to announce our endorsement of Zack Lahn for governor of Iowa. He's a sixth generation Iowan, and he's a farmer, a businessman, and he's worked, for his whole life, and his whole family has, to pass down through the generations the principles of healthy farming. Zack's vision is simple but powerful, and it's a MAHA principle, and he wants to make Iowa healthy. And it is not a healthy state, and he is going to push to really make that happen. And his plan takes direct aim at the corporate agriculture and pharmaceutical companies there that have undermined family farmers, family values, and compromised the health of the people in his state. So he stands for family farms, traditional values, for real investment in the most important resource that his state has and that the whole country has. And that is the people of this country. We cannot have a healthy country without healthy children, without a population that's healthy. So this race is a national problem. It's a national race, and it's critical for the MAHA movement. And victory here will demonstrate that we can rebuild, values that will make this country healthy. So join us in trying to make this happen. Share this message, contribute whatever you can to his campaign, volunteer your time, keep this movement surging forward. I'm really, really happy to welcome Zack Lahn.
Hey, thank you, Tony. I gotta say, this is a big honor. And Tony, I'm just so thankful for what you all have done with MAHA, you and Lee and the team and Kyle, to start to bring this to such a mainstream place. And I was listening to Gary and Vani talk. And when you hear about these things that are going on, when you hear about the chemicals being added to food, how just even the Cheeto piece that she talked about, I think sometimes you just have to sit back and ask, why? Why is this happening? And I think Bobby Kennedy said it very well in a podcast I listened to, is that we are in a spiritual battle for the future of our country and our children especially. And that you're right, we cannot stop fighting for this, because this is one of the most foundational pieces that we have to fight for. And so I think for the people on this call, I just want to tell a little bit about my background and my journey. I mean, a lot of my adult life has been intertwined with what is now known as the MAHA journey. I can remember 15 years ago when I developed an autoimmune condition. And after developing that, I remember somebody saying to me, have you thought about what you eat? And I think, like so many Americans, the answer was no, I hadn't thought about what I eat. But at that point, I read this book, and I think it was a book a long time ago, something about, maybe it was the Whole30 diet. And I tried this, and not only did I feel much better, but the autoimmune condition I had improved. And I think that really opened my eyes to this idea that the world isn't exactly how we see it. And I think that cover has been blown off of that. The world is not at all as we've been taught to see it, or we've been maybe propagandized to see it. And that the next thing on my journey came when it was time to decide, what are we going to do when it comes to childhood vaccines for our kids? And understanding that, there's a very large system that makes it almost impossible, or at least it did back then, to be somebody that was going to, object to that. And so we had to fight that battle too. But I think in my life, one of the big turning points, my family has been in Iowa since the 1800s, since fighting in the Civil War. And our journey has been intertwined with agriculture the whole time. And my dad, a pastor and an agronomist, for 20 years, he spent his time in fields as a crop consultant. And when he was doing that, I would go with him on these four-wheelers. We had nets. We'd go out and catch bugs to see what the pests looked like. We'd see what the weeds looked like. And then he would write a detailed report to the farmer saying, this is what you need to apply. And he applied what he was told would work. And after doing that for 2 decades, he developed the exact type of lymphoma that's been implicated in the lawsuits that we've seen. And I think these have been very informative moments in my life, and they instruct how I look at the world and how I look at the problems that our state's facing too. And, Tony, you touched on this, but today Iowa has more cancer than ever anywhere in the history of human civilization. Matter of fact, in the top 10 counties in Iowa, all the top counties of cancer in the state of Iowa, they're all rural counties with the highest level of cancer. And if you live in one of these counties, your lifetime chance of getting cancer is 1 in 2. 50% is your lifetime chance. And so then you look at what's happening with the heritage and the culture. I often tell people that my campaign is really about restoring the culture and the heritage to our state, but it's not just that. It's more than that, because when we look at our country, these things are not just happening in Iowa, but they're happening all over the country. Iowa alone in the past 20 years has lost 10,000 family farms. In that same time, the suicide rate amongst our farmers went up by 50%, and no one's talking about it. And so a quarter of our land, 25% of Iowa's land, is now owned by out-of-state investors and funds that treat Iowa like an annuity. They keep our young farmers off of the ground. They raise our rental rates. They inflate the valuations. And I just tell people often, this is not a normal progression. This is not how it's supposed to happen. And when you look at why this is happening, when I was growing up in Iowa, there were 300 companies that were selling seeds and inputs to farmers. Today, there's 3 that make up over 85% of the market. They treat our farmers as price takers. They set the pieces of the game for the farmers. They're extorting them. Anytime the crop price goes up, they raise their input costs, even though there's not a correlating factor. Matter of fact, just in 5 years, nitrogen fertilizers went up by 150%, while the corn price has been down 2%. We are at a point of crisis in our communities and in our farms. And Gary said it correctly. Our family, as I mentioned, came here a long time ago, 1900. My great-great-grandfather built the farm that became our homestead. And in 2005, like the story is all over the country, my great-grandmother passed away and the farm was sold out of the family. In 2014, I was able to buy this farm back. And since then, my wife and I have rebuilt the farm board by board with our kids. And we've also became the new stewards of the land that my family had been farming for over 100 years. And we do farm regeneratively. We don't use any of these products that you hear about. And the big thing I want to tell farmers too is that we are able to do that and make a profit. My whole goal here is to see a resurgence and a revival of our rural communities, our family farms, so that we can use Iowa as the model to do the same restoration around the country. But right now, because of what's happening with the consolidation in our agriculture markets, and it's not just that, but that's one of the biggest parts. We have to break these companies up, and these companies are acting as monopolies. Politicians have had their head in the sand for far too long. And because our farmers are kept on razor-thin margins, they can't experiment with other practices. I know many farmers that would like to experiment with other practices, but when you're operating at margins that are break even at best right now, your appetite to experiment is very low and you can't take any risks. And so I think we have to look at this as a spiritual battle and look at this as we're trying to be the vanguard for the next generation to help young people be able to get onto farms and experiment with new practices and rebuild the health of our communities. Right now in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa has the world's largest nitrate removal system on its water supply. And we still, last summer, had a boil water notice in our state. We can do far better than this. We know how to solve these problems. But as in so many of these things that Vani and Gary and others talked about, there are powerful interests that are fighting against this. and they're fighting against the way of life that we hold dear. And I'm here for that purpose. I'm here because I truly want my children and my grandchildren to stay and grow their families in a rural community in the state of Iowa. And I want to help the country see how we can do that. So I'm honored to have your endorsement. I'm honored to be a part of the MAHA coalition, and thank you all for your support.
Thanks, Zack. And let me just say that I think you're really right, that much of this really is simple and it's personal. So, people should question everything that they're told. They should exercise more. They should sleep better. They should get sunlight. They should eat better food. They should be careful about everything that they put into their bodies. They should vote for candidates who care about our health and who care about our children's health. And, I hope that people will vote for you and for candidates like you. And, so proud to endorse you. Thanks for coming on the call, and hope to see much more of you.
Thank you, Tony.
So, next up we have Russell Brand. He's been on lots of these calls, and I just want to say that I'm really grateful for Russell being a MAHA evangelist, a MAHA missionary. He's the poet of health. All kinds of health, physical health, spiritual health. He's just doing great things and really helping us in ways that nobody else can help us. So thanks so much, Russell, for coming on time after time.
I'm most grateful to be all. Lovely to hear, as always, Gary Brecka and Zack's contributions and the other great contributions that you offer. I was thinking just then, Tony, about the principle of brokerage. When Gary said that the problem is not necessarily seed oil in so much as the plant is inherently problematic. It's just the distance between the plant and the table and the process. I was thinking that there is a great deal of brokerage that we have to deal with. Information is brokered often by centralized or censorial organizations. Through bureaucracies and through commercial interests, food and pharma are brokered prior to achieving their intended task. Democracy itself is a system of brokerage that perhaps is one that could afford some amendment. Thinking about the foundation and founding principles of your country, it seems that uppermost in the explicit declarations were freedom, that we ought be free. And it's difficult for us to be free when our lives are continually subject to brokerage of various agencies that we've been schooled, understandably, not to trust. In the content I make these days, I speak with controversial people. And what does it take to be controversial these days? Often it's just telling the truth. And indeed, even if someone like Zack is successful in his political pursuits, you know that people are going to say he's controversial. I watched a brilliant video that via Gavin DeBecker of, who said it, was it Bobby Kennedy or was it bin Laden? And even Secretary Kennedy was unable to identify which hyperbolic statements were condemning him and which Osama bin Laden. Some of them you'd think, oh, that's got to be bin Laden. He's a terror. He's trying to destroy your children's lives. He hates America. Bin Laden? No, that's still Bobby Kennedy. He's a member of Al-Qaeda. He plotted to blow up the Twin Towers. This has got to be, but no, that's still Robert Kennedy. And, today I was talking to Candace Owens for my podcast, and the counsel that I offered her was, it's so wonderful when people are bold, but we must be so careful. But we do have to be bold. And I suppose that boldness, and all of us must know this in some way. Do we all know? It comes from recognizing, well, this is temporary here. We're here temporarily. Let's try and live in alignment with, as best we can, truth with one another. Why would we make food counterfeit? Why would we make medicine counterfeit? Why would we put every exchange through channels of profiteering, commodification? control? Why are we doing that? How have we ended up here? And it's been alluded to, I think, by the last speaker, the spiritual sickness that must allow a nation to enter into such a state. The deeper remedies, it seems to me, continue to be spiritual. 1 minute remaining. And those spiritual solutions for me, I sought them hard through drugs and alcohol and hedonism and fame and attention. And now I'm in this very interesting place where the thing that's always been a flaw, wanting more attention, it's beginning to evaporate. And it's rather glorious. I can see how people could fall into monasticism or nihilism or a kind of detachment that stops us caring. Part of the reason I don't do that is because I feel that through this community, sanctioned and being sanctified by Christ, that I'm a participant in something necessary and important beyond what I want or what I feel about other people or what I feel other people may feel about me. To be participants in eternity, you have to live in accordance with and abide by eternal principles that will always involve valor and honor and self-sacrifice and telling the truth and allowing the consequences to be whatever they are. I'm grateful that we're able to be participants in such a community and such an endeavor here. Thank you, Tony. Thanks all of you for keeping up the good fight, for being bold. Please let me know who I can support or help in the chat. If there's content that you need to be pushed, if there's messages that is beneficial for me to advance, I'm here for that service because I believe in you, Tony Lyons. I believe in all of you. God, Jay Bhattacharya, man. What a guy. Praise the Lord.
Thanks so much, Russell. You know, liberation. I mean, MAHA really is about liberation because you can't, just like you said, Russell, you can't be free unless you're physically, mentally, and spiritually healthy. There's just no way to be free without those things. And, you know, then you talked about, is Secretary Kennedy dangerous? You know, is he like bin Laden? And I guess that he really is a danger. I mean, he is an existential danger to the lies, the greed, the corruption that we've been subjected to for a generation. You know, and I can live with the kind of fear of ending the control of big pharma, big food, big ag over our lives. That's a fear that I'm okay with. So, you know, thanks so much, Russell. It's always great to have you on and, you know, always great just to listen to your wisdom. So for all of you, you know, here are some calls to action. Thanks so much for joining us this week. We're going to just keep on doing this week after week, you know, for the next 3 years and hopefully much longer. As always, you're going to get a follow-up email with you know, more calls to action. Please share these with everybody on social media that you can share them with your mailing list, send them out far and wide. And sign up for the MAHA report on Substack. We've got just great articles coming out. We've got more and more followers there. We think we can get to the point where ours is the biggest Substack on Substack. So I think that's going to happen, and I hope that you guys will help us make that happen. And then, you know, go to our website, mahaaction.com. Look at all the bills that we're tracking. You know, really just follow us, engage with us, post things. Do all the things that you've been doing. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. And, you know, please follow Zack Lane, read about him, learn about him, and encourage people in the great state of Iowa to vote for him. Thanks so much and have a great weekend.
America's children are sick and moms have been betrayed. The time for empty promises, long past. Now is a time for action. MAHA is the most powerful force of collective action in generations. The grassroots power of moms and activists has created an army of health warriors with more reach than all mainstream media combined. Together, we can end the chronic disease epidemic. MAHA's influence is reaching millions. It's reaching Congress. And that energy, these chain reactions, are working.
How about Operation Stork Speed?
Dozens of food companies removing toxic ingredients.
I plan to lead by example.
MAHA is now.
We're talking about how to change the culture.
The American people want America healthy again.
It is a renaissance moment in health in America.
For health, freedom, and the truth. Join us at MAHA Action.